Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us here on the Daily Racing Form YouTube. I'm Gino Buccola alongside David Aragona. We're going to head on out to Gulfstream Park right in the middle of a loaded graded stakes card on Pegasus World Cup Day. We'll dive into race number 9. These are the boys going long on the turf. It's the William L. McKnight mile and a half on the turf course for 4-year-olds and up. We previewed the fillies and mares in race number 7 going long on the turf. David, you and I will get to talk about the boys now going a long distance on the grass. I think from the outside, we'll see a second page of runners in a minute. Bold Act will probably be one that gets a lot of support. Super Logical for Charles Appleby. We talked about another Charles Appleby runner in the previous turf race that we discussed as a major player. And this one is no doubt a top contender. And there are some other familiar names in here like Rock Emperor, who we've seen through the last few years in a bunch of graded stakes races. Doesn't win all that often anymore. What do you think about the field assembled for this one?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that Charlie Appleby is sending over some runners to compete on Pegasus World Cup Day. It's not something he's really done lately. I mean, maybe not ever. I think in the last 5 years in Formulator, Charlie Appleby had 0 starters at Gulfstream. So something new, and Bold Act definitely fits well in this field. But something we know about these Appleby runners, they typically take a lot of money in North America.
Yeah, and maybe you can find a little value elsewhere. Let's see what the pace projector thinks at this race going longer. Who's going to be up front and what will the pace look like? You have Cathkin Peak, who in 2 of the last 3 races has been pretty aggressive, and that worked out well a couple starts back at Saratoga on August the 21st, winning the John's Call there. So there's not that much other speed in here, honestly, David, besides him, some other pressers, but not a lot of horses who may be up there pushing him.
Yeah, it does feel like a pace that really could slow down. We'll see if Kafkin Peak is able to rein in his speed because at different times since they've changed to front running tactics, he has been a little bit of a runoff in his races. That was the case when he won the John's Call, just opened up a big margin early and never relinquished it. So we'll see how fast he goes if anybody wants to tangle with him on the front end. But as you said, it's not like there are too many others in this field that really look like they want to be forward.
Let's meet the field, starting with the number 1, Limited Liability, who is a stakes winner and is multiple graded stakes placed. This horse has some versatility, too. I'm not sure if he'll be on the lead. He was going 2 miles plus 2 starts back, but he was able to move pretty early. Actually was last of 9 and made an early move in this race that we're watching right here. Put him all the way up to second to press, so kind of handy and a horse that I think you can maybe put in different spots.
Yeah, it really was a strange trip through the early stages of that Red Smith, as you said. Kind of got shuffled back after the start to last, and made this 3 to 4 wide move around the first turn to be forward in that race. And I kind of get what Frankie Dettori was doing because he feels like the kind of horse that just doesn't really have to turn a foot to pass everybody in the stretch. So you want to get him to position early and sort of get him to push the pace, make use of his ample stamina to have his best chance in a race like this. We'll see if that works out now drawing the rail here because tough to make an early move when you get shuffled back from the inside if he doesn't break that well. But he certainly has the talent to be there at the end.
Of course, he lost to Integration, will be one of the major players in the Pegasus World Cup turf. California Frolic is the number 2, is a multiple stakes winner, but just won for the last 17. We're just not seeing a whole lot of victories. Was actually 10th in the running of this race last year, David.
Yeah, he's one of 3 in this race that's cutting back from a 2 mile distance to the mile and a half of this William L. McKnight. Just hard to find the performance in this horse's PPs that really makes him an appealing option in here, but he is going to be a big price.
Captain Peak has shown some speed going long on the grass. Previously was a mile, like mile and an eighth horse who would come from off the pace. And since they've gone a little bit longer, they've just decided to use that speed. Any chance this horse can sneak away against a group like this?
It's certainly possible, and it's not the worst thing to try to do at Gulfstream Park, where sometimes speed can carry on both surfaces. That day that he won the John's Call, there was plenty of give in the ground. You could see that the times and the fractions were very slow, and it felt like a course that not every horse handled. He certainly did, holding on to win that race by 5 lengths. Since then, he just hasn't run quite as well. They tried to go to the front again last time in the Sycamore. He just came up totally empty on the stretch. So he's going to have to do better than that to beat this group. But Mike Maker does know how to spring surprises in races like this.
Perhaps another horse that will try to show a little bit of speed could be Golden Eye. He has been forwardly placed when they've gone a little bit longer. 2 starts back on the turf out in Southern California, was forwardly placed sitting close in the Hollywood Turf Cup. They took a shot on the dirt last time out, but get back to the get back to the turf where he's been just better overall. But does he fit with a group like this?
He was definitely heading in the right direction before they chose to try the dirt last time in the Lafitte Pinkai, but even those top efforts, like the allowance win three back or his performance in the Hollywood Turf Cup, they don't really put him in the mix to win a race like this. Maybe he'll be involved in the pace, but kind of hard to see him around at the end.
Next one, David, it was one of the harder reads for me here. Anglophile, who was sixth in this race last year and is a grade 3 winner. If you're just playing these horses and looking off of speed figures, kind of fits. And some of the better figures make this horse a player, but 0 for the last 8. And I'm just kind of hemming and hawing, going back and forth. Can talk to me a little bit about Anglophile here.
I'll say this horse left me a little sour last year because I picked him in the McKnight last year and I didn't think he got a great trip. He was wide around every turn and just was never really in a position to make a run. And yeah, he hasn't visited the winner's circle since then, but I think he's run a little better than it looks on a few occasions, particularly two back at Ellis Park. That was a really bunched field moving around the far turn in that Kentucky Downs turf preview. And he got shuffled back a little bit, was in traffic in upper stretch. But once he got into the clear, he was absolutely flying past horses in the last eighth of a mile, chasing home Highway Robber, who'd probably be the favorite if he were in a race like this. And then last time at Kentucky Downs again, got stuck kind of wide, moving a little bit too soon on the far turn, no cover. Those are not the kind of trips that are successful on the turf. Now he's drawn a little bit more towards the inside. I'm hopeful that Javier Castellano can save some ground with him. The question is 12 furlongs. Does he really want to go a mile and a half? I don't know, but I think he's going to be a big price in this race, and he's a little dirtied up.
Lord Eddard Stark closed from 15 lengths out of it to win the Alan Jerkins going 2 miles on the turf back on December the 7th. You and I previewed a race last week where he was actually entered going a mile and a 16th, but they decided to run in this race, which is probably better for him, especially with his running style. And we can see him here coming from way out of it. There's actually a couple horses in this replay that we can look at though, right, David?
Yeah, Utah Beach is the one that's actually taking over on the front end, the other gray. But here comes Lord Edward Stark, the course that's close to white at this point in his career, charging down the outside. And this was a race, a 2 mile affair, where a horse just ran off on the front end, going unreasonably fast, took about a 15-length lead onto the backstretch. And Lord Edward Stark just turned out to be the horse that made the final move in that race. And the final move is often the right move in a race where a horse sets an unreasonably fast pace and the race starts to fall apart, and it did kind of fall into Lord Eddard Stark's lap. But he has a horse that did seem to really improve going the longer distance. That was 2 miles. Now it's a mile and a half. Probably not as much pace in this race. So I wonder if lightning is going to strike twice with a horse that wanted 60-1 last time, but he will be a big price again.
Harrow is pretty sharp. He's won 3 of his last 4 against softer. Now will step up and face Stakes Company and has improved and gotten a little bit faster on some of the speed figures since moving into the Safety Joseph Jr. barn. But this will be another step up. One of those races was a claiming crown race that he was in at Churchill 2 starts back. So that was a solid group, but this is definitely better than what he's been facing.
Yeah, he's been a pretty good claim for just $16,000. Has had plenty of success since the claim by Sappy Joseph. His victory going a mile and a half, it came at Kentucky Downs. I've said this before. Sappy Joseph tends to do things at Kentucky Downs that don't seem to get replicated elsewhere, so I want to take that with a grain of salt. And last time he just beat much weaker at Tampa Bay Downs, got plenty of pace to close into over a shorter distance, was able to pick up those rivals late. I just found him really tough to peg in here. I guess if he can get up close to the pace like he did at Kentucky Downs when he went this distance, he could be a threat late, but a little tough to peg from a class standpoint.
Yamato, the number 8, had a slow start in his most recent race. He was last of 9. He had to move widest of all, chasing a lone speed winner. He ended up getting up for 4th. That was going a mile and a 16th on the synthetic. He's a little bit better going a mile and a half on the turf like this. When you see, actually, the last time he went a mile and a half on the turf, he was winning a stakes race at Laurel Park. And a couple of his best races have been going this longer trip. So I think he'll just be a little bit better going this trip. Does he fit with this group, David?
I really didn't know what to do with him in this spot. I'm always afraid of these Mike Maker horses. This one's form has been a little bit up and down. There's obviously a big layoff in his career from one Japan Turf Cup to the next Japan Turf Cup in 23 to 24. As you mentioned, he does have that victory going a mile and a half. I didn't love the field he was beating that day, but he does have some prior form against tougher that would put him in the mix. And I agree with you. His last trip, it just didn't work out. He was always out of position after a poor start. I won't be surprised if he's forward early, if he's around at the end. I just don't know exactly where he's going to be placed. So found him to be a pretty tough read.
Rock Emperor is 0 for his last 13. His last win was back in July of 2022. He's a grade one winner, multiple graded stakes winner. And while he hasn't won in a while, David, he probably has 3 or 4 races along that stretch of not winning that would be good enough to compete with any of the horses in here on their best day. Just hard to put this one on the win end when he doesn't get into the winner's circle all that often anymore.
Yeah, if you just take your PPs and scratch out all the names and the results and just look at the buyer speed figure line, he's one of the top players in this race because he's run some of the fastest numbers. But then you remember who he is, Rock Emperor, the 9-year-old who just doesn't win that often and has had plenty of chances in races like this where he looks logical and still settles for minor awards or just ends up somewhere in the middle of the pack. So I feel like we're probably going to see the similar performance from Rock Emperor that we usually do, but he's probably going to be a decent price in this race if you like him.
Utah Beach, we watched in the replay where he moved a little bit early and then he was run down by Lord Eddard Stark. That was going 2 miles, so he gets the cut back now to this mile and a half. And honestly, when you look at his overall body of work, he doesn't have a whole lot of bad races. You know, he really does usually show up and give a pretty good account of himself in the 11 starts. So he's still pretty lightly raced too in comparison to many in here.
Yeah, I mean, he's a 5-year-old, but he's kind of just reaching the peak of his career. And I feel like he's always been cut out to be this kind of horse. Took him a little while to break his maiden, spent some time in allowance company, and obviously had a layoff in the middle of last year that derailed things a little bit. But since he's been working his way back for Nacho Correas over the past 3 starts, I just like the progression that he's shown. Obviously, the race at Aqueduct was just a prep, but he ran really well in the Sycamore behind Bold Act, had some traffic on the far turn that day. Had to work his way into the clear in the lane and was still finishing at the end. And then, as you mentioned, last time in the 2 mile H. Allen Jerkins, just a tough trip. He found himself in that chasing position behind that runoff leader, never could get cover in that race. And it's really tough to run an entire turf race around 4 turns with no cover. And that's what he tried to do. Ended up hitting the front too soon and still battled back at the end. I think he's this kind of horse and he fits with these and he could be a decent price.
The likely horse to beat in here is Bold Act, but we'll say he wins the Sycamore in 2023 at Keeneland. He wins the Dubai City of Gold, a Group 2, and he comes over here in early 2024 in April, and he's just heavily backed in his first couple starts. And as you were pointing out, the Appleby runners, they tend to take a lot of money in here. So for a horse who I think is very deserving of being one of the favorites and a major player in here, you just have to beware that he's been under 7-2 in all 4 of his most recent starts, and he has not won any of them. And, you know, he's probably going to be another short price in here again.
Yeah, and he also doesn't look like a fun horse to ride, and I believe the jockeys must think that too because he's had 7 different jockeys in his last
Mhm.
7 races, which is not something you usually see for a Charlie Appleby runner. This is one of his better performances that we're taking a look at here in the Sycamore, where he settled a bit better than usual, was able to make that wide run around the far turn, which is not easy at Keedland. He lost a lot of ground, got there, and almost holds off Highway Robber, who, if he were back in this race, probably would be the favorite. So Bold Act's best performance clearly makes him the horse to beat. You just have to decide what kind of trip you think he's going to get because he never breaks that well. He typically refuses to settle, is relegated to wide trips because he doesn't race well with cover. So William Buick, I mean, obviously he's the stable jock for Charlie Appleby, but he hasn't ridden this horse that often. He's not super familiar with him. So from post 11, I just kind of wonder what trip is coming for Bold Act.
And rounding out the body of the field, Cash Equity, who hasn't been the mile and a half trip for the last 18 races. And then on a separate note, for the last 14. So a horse who just isn't really winning a lot at the shorter distances. So they're going to kind of throw one downfield and see if maybe stretching back out will help get this horse maybe more forwardly placed, more involved. There are some really solid races like the one at Kentucky Downs chasing Goliad there, which was very solid. And some speed figures that would fit. Not a bad effort behind Major Dude, who's probably going to be a top 3 or 4 betting choice in the Pegasus World Cup turf. But outside draw, not winning a whole lot, and now stretching back out. What do you think about Cash Equity?
Yeah, when I just watched his last race in the Fort Lauderdale, you want to get a little interested in him because he did have some real traffic in upper stretch and looked like he had run that day and the race was kind of coming apart. And he appeared as like one who might be able to take it over and just never really found the path that he needed. But that was going a mile and an eighth. And you mentioned his prior form going the longer distances. It was just okay. Didn't really improve at all on his surrounding conventional route form. And now at this point in his career, not winning too many races, often leaving himself with too much to do, breaking from post 12. It just feels like there's a lot to overcome.
Dashman leads 4 also eligibles who'll be hoping to get in on Saturday, but we will move to our selections now. David, in the McKnight, who are you going to put on top?
Yeah, I was kind of torn between my top two picks in here. I think Anglophile might have a better trip coming to him in this race. I'm chasing him a little bit after liking him in this race last year. We'll see if he can finally get back to the winner's circle. But I like the number 10 Utah Beach quite a bit. I just think he's a horse that fits this race really well. He's reaching his peak form now as a newly turned 5-year-old, and he's a lot better than his most recent results. So I put him on top.
Some of the same things I think that I said about Anglophile, you were kind of saying about Yamato, who I put on top, and then you put a
Mhm.
Anglophile in the at a top spot in the second spot there. So those are horses who I think are kind of tricky, maybe could offer a little value here. I'll put Yamato on top, limited liability down on the inside, should be able to hold that position. I think be a part of this thing late. 8, 1, 11, 9 for me, 10, 5, 11, 1 for David. Best of luck, whoever you're playing in race 9 on Saturday at Gulfstream Park.